Welcome, everybody. It's Mike Ayalon here with Greek University, and we are at episode number 18 for Fraternity Foodie. Wow, I can't believe we have 18 episodes already. We've called these episodes Fraternity Foodie because there is nothing like food that brings people together. So we are going to continue to ask some of the tough questions, and we're also going to find out from our guests where they love to eat, because of course that's something that I'm always passionate about. And today we have a real treat with us. We have Joseph Rios. He is the founder of Leadership and Values in Action. Joseph is a longtime friend of mine, and Joseph, I am so happy that you're here with us today.
It's a joy to finally be a part of this. I'm really thrilled.
Excellent. All right, so let's just jump right into some of these questions here. The first question that I have for you, I am just so curious about this. You have both your bachelor's degree and also your doctor of education from the University of Southern California, USC. So what did you think when you saw USC was in the news recently for this big college admissions scandal?
Two thoughts went through my head. One was how much this type of situation, particularly at an elite private university, really reinforces this idea that private school kids buy their way into an education. USC has had the nickname University of Spoiled Children for years, and when something like this happens, it just made us go like 50 steps back, for the efforts that, particularly a place like USC, which has the most number of international students in the country at a private school. It's probably one of the most racially diverse student bodies. It has students from all different type of class backgrounds, and increasingly more Pell eligible students are applying to USC. And when you hear about something like this, it makes it seem like only the rich and private people with money are able to get into these institutions. But the reality is that that's not the case. And then what do you do about that? Like, how does that make you feel as an alum? How does this make you feel that people think that you bought your way into the institution, when I can tell you how much I worked for both degrees to get both in and out in the time that I had allotted. The second idea, though, was how much people who have, to be quite honest, mediocre children who are trying to buy their way into elite institutions. I know what the student profile is to get into a USC, and it's not your average college student. It just isn't, not anymore, not in 2019. And yet, people with average children felt they had to spend $500,000 to buy their children into that type of institution, when they could have gone to literally any institution and spent a tenth of that for a college education. Like, what were they actually after? Was it the name of USC? And when they graduate with that degree, what are they going to do with it? Do they know how to access that education? They may have gotten the networking from it, but what did we actually teach them, and what are we actually reinforcing that they can buy with an education? So I feel like it's still unresolved with me, at least. I know I'm so proud to wear my USC gear, but I will tell you that first time I wore it after the announcement, I was like, oh, please, nobody say anything to me, because I know how I'm feeling on the inside, and I'll probably say something unkind.
Yeah, I have so many questions about it myself. As I think about it, I wonder, are the parents doing it for their children, or are the parents doing it for themselves? So I have questions about that. And then I have questions about these students themselves. What do they think about it? I'm sure some of them had knowledge that this was going on. Some of them had absolutely no knowledge that this was going on. So what does it do to them, to the student, to their children? I just have so many questions about this.
Particularly for the students that had to fake a disability to get into an institution. I mean, that's just below. Like, I don't even know how do you describe that type of ethical behavior. Like, it's not ethical at all. Like, it's kind of disgusting.
Yeah. Wow. Unbelievable. Well, I'm sure we're going to learn a lot more as that continues on. I know at both UNLV and also at NJIT, you were responsible for diversity programs on campus. So, from your perspective, this is one of the other things that I've been kind of talking about and dealing with over the last few years. What can fraternities and sororities do in order to attract a more diverse membership as the student population becomes more and more diverse on college campuses?
Here's what I always think is really interesting during rush and recruitment weeks at a college campus. People spend hours and hours and hours with the most diverse people in their residence halls. And then 2 weeks later, they don't talk to them anymore. There's something about that mixing pot of making friends and being authentic with people that you're just starting to get to know and wanting to learn from them, and then being told, but for the next 10 weeks, you can't really talk to them. Mm. And so I think there's something to be done during that recruitment time. Like, how do we capture that feeling that diversity and diversity of thought, diversity of background, diversity of interests benefits Greek life as opposed to is separate from Greek life? Mm-hmm. And so I think we still need to continue to dig deep down into what is the right time for people to be making a commitment to a fraternity. Is it before or after they make those friends? You know, and I think that may be a great study for people that, even though the NIC is not a fan of deferred recruitment, do we see changes to diverse backgrounds being initiated once people have already made friends? Mm. And I think that that's something to really look at. I think the other thing is, like, what is the barrier to diversity on these campuses? Is it because on a predominantly white campus, people from ethnic minority backgrounds already feel marginalized? And so is it to their benefit to join another predominantly white organization for safety, for emotional safety, for cultural preservation? Like, what is it that they need to get through college? Because I'm not necessarily interested in making organizations more diverse if it puts the students at more emotional harm. You know, that I know what it was like to go to a predominantly white school in the Midwest when I did my master's degree, and the whole total population of ethnic minority students was 10%. The last thing I wanted to do was be around more white people, to be quite honest. Like, that just was not my goal. While it may have benefited a chapter in terms of its diversity efforts, what is it that we're actually doing to help students maintain and be part of something that actually helps them get through college? And so again, if we're going to be bringing people into predominantly white organizations, if we're talking about NIC organizations, mm-hmm. That are IFC affiliated, what is it that they're doing to actually make sure that these students are valued, not just for a checkbox of look how diverse we are, but that their cultures are reinforced, that they don't feel othered, that they are gaining some of that social capital that we know comes through fraternity affiliation. I don't think it's an easy answer. I think until the organizations really begin to look at how are we valuing diversity from the inside rather than just a checkbox, I think students of color in particular are going to be looking at them very skeptically. What has been really great is seeing organizations being much more open to people from different gender and sexual orientations. That once you begin realizing that those don't determine your character, and really, particularly on the men's organizations, they're just guys that want to hang out with other guys. Like, that's really one of the reasons why they're drawn to a fraternity experience. You find that they're able to kind of maybe make the leap to understanding, oh, difference is good, difference is interesting, difference doesn't harm us, difference doesn't define us, difference makes us open to other people when people are able to see past whatever stereotypes are on our campus because they see us as being open and welcoming. And I think that those gestures go very far in organizations being able to recruit.
Yeah. I 100% agree. And I think we're definitely making some strides because I'm also seeing some of the same things that you're seeing around sexual orientation, around even age, various different ways that you can slice up diversity. So I'm encouraged, but I also agree with you. If we're going to stick with this model where we are recruiting first semester freshmen, are we giving them time to make some of their own friends? And are we really celebrating the diversity of the organization from within? And do the students really understand the importance of diversity, how they're a better organization because of it? And scientifically, I can show you how you are a better organization. You're able to
Yeah.
make better decisions, faster decisions, all of those things. But I think we have to keep talking about that until they understand the true value. So that's good. Now, you ended up leaving student affairs after 13 years to start your doctoral program full time. And I'm sure that was a very difficult decision. I was actually talking to another higher ed professional earlier this morning about trying to make that decision. Is now the right decision to make that leap? So, how did you arrive at that decision to move on?
For me, it was two issues were going on simultaneously. One was I had learned all I was going to learn from that position that I was at NJIT. I worked with a really wonderful set of directors and assistant deans, and loved the work that I was doing. But I could project out about 5 years, and I would still be doing that same work. That was truthfully exhausting. I was working about 50, 60 hours a week, doing wonderful things, but wasn't doing things that were going to change me. And I felt like it was time to either commit to a doctoral program or start a PhD and just go to school full time. I'd actually decided to go the EDD route, become a hall director. So I was working part-time, but really with 13 years of experience, I was really working about half-time. Let's be honest. Like I knew how to do the work. And I really decided that I was going to value my educational experience to be a better leader, that I was going to commit time to me to get through that experience, because I knew that there was no way that I was going to be able to give up the high level, senior level student affairs work that I was doing and go to school full time. And having done in grad school, there's no way I could have done either 50-50. I needed to put all my time into being a student to get through that program in 3 years and really engage and immerse myself in the literature. So I did my dissertation on promising practices in anti-hazing education for fraternity advisors. And as you can imagine, there's a lot written about that. And I can tell you a lot about why hazing education doesn't work sometimes, and why it does work sometimes. But if I had tried to do that part-time and really only wrote the dissertation on the side on the weekends or at 11 o'clock at night, I don't think I would have been as immersed in it. And so that was what I wanted. I wanted to be a student again, because I'm a good student. I mean, I went to USC once. I was like, I can do this again. And I really kind of engaged as a student again. I don't think it's a decision that people need to make thinking like I need to quit my job full time. I was really lucky that I got a hall director position that paid my tuition and gave me a place to live and food to eat. And that was something I really couldn't say no to. I wrote about this in an AFA Essentials article about what you should be looking at when it's time to leave. And the last thing that I wrote was, when you know it's time to go, when you can say goodbye to your students. The students are going to be okay. And I think that emotional tie to the students to saying, if I leave, this will not happen. The students are going to be okay. The students are going to be okay. And we have to like factor them out of our own personal lives. They're much more resilient than we give them credit for.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that 100%. So you and I met when you were with Tau Delta Phi fraternity, and I know you served two roles for the fraternity. One of them was initially Director of Membership Development, and then the other was as Executive Director. And I also know that you implemented this rubric-based chapter evaluation and assessment plan. So if a chapter out there is listening right now and they're interested in doing a self-assessment, what types of things should they be looking at to examine overall chapter health? What do you think they should be looking at?
I think they need to be looking at least three things. The first is what is their recruitment profile on the college campus? Obviously, organizations like Fired Up give really amazing tools on how to develop a pool, an actual pool, not this intangible, there's like 40% men on campus. No, like we know 1,500 men, we're friends with 400 of them, this is our pool. And so if you aren't able to have a pulse of who these men are and understanding recruitment at your institution, what's next year's class going to look like. If you can't recruit until you know what next year's class is going to look like. And so you have to be listening to the vice president of student affairs. You have to be listening to your director of student activities, because budgets are determined that way. Programming is determined that way. So you need to figure out who's coming so you know who you're going to be recruiting. The second thing is you need to understand your finances. If you have men that are not paying dues on time, leave them out. Get them out. I used to tell the men in my fraternity, we're in the business of brotherhood. We're in the business of brotherhood. So if people aren't paying dues, they bought their pin, they're lifelong brothers, thank you, but you can't be in this organization. We can't function and subsidize your membership if you're not paying your part. That's the reality. And I think the third thing that people need to really gauge is alumni engagement and involvement. And those two things are not the same. Alumni engagement is how your alumni positively reflect back on the chapter. What are they doing that you can refer to for industries or jobs that people are going into? And how can you connect your new members and your established members and your graduating members to these men that are working in some of the fields that they want to go to? Whether it's an informal interview, bringing them in for mock interviews, resume reviews, interviews for new members. And I think alumni involvement is a little bit different in that how are your alumni involved on the college campus? Because I think that connection to the alma mater is just as important to the connection to the chapter. I think that you're a really great example that you follow Buffalo like it's your job.
Yep.
And people connect you with your institution. Same thing with me. If people know anything about me, is that I went to the University of Southern California. I'm connected to my alma mater. My fraternity affiliation didn't come with my alma mater. So really it's important for me to kind of distinguish myself as someone who went to college, that I'm reflecting back on my college and giving something back to them. Because if they are then to bring me on in some sort of leadership role regionally or locally, I'm still a Todd-Elt in that role. And I think it's really important for collegiate members to really kind of understand that, again, you may not be wearing letters or a badge or a pin or whatever you want to call your paraphernalia, but the people that are bringing you back into those alumni roles post-graduation know what organization you were part of. And they're doing it for a reason. And so if you're going to sustain an organization, I think those are the three things you really need to look at.
I love it. Recruitment, finances, alumni involvement, and engagement. I love every piece of that. The finances piece is always an interesting one because absolutely, we can't do anything as an organization without that finance piece. We can't do anything. We're stuck. And a lot of brothers that I talk to.
I knew organizations that were not going to do well if they didn't pay their chapter dues. If
Right.
you weren't paying your chapter dues, the red flag, that was like maroon flag. Like that wasn't even red. Like that was like red.
But it's an uncomfortable thing for the undergraduates to talk about because they're all into the brotherhood and they're like, well, you're focusing too much on the money piece. We're, really connected here and you're just focusing on the money. I remember working at University of Rhode Island, and outside of one of the chapter houses, there was a sign, and the sign said, "Brotherhood begins when the check clears." And I just thought, wow. I mean, it couldn't be said any better.
we kind of normalize that by actually talking about we're in the business of brotherhood and we're teaching you how to run a small business. And so if we're going to operationalize why fraternity is to really emphasize the business part of it, that there is a business to the work that we do, and you're paying for the privilege of accessing resources. You can get some of these resources anywhere else, but you're paying for the privilege of accessing it first in a smaller group, one-on-one, with the mentoring. Like you have to pay for those things in the real world.
Yeah.
This is not,
And
it's not a poor.
Right. And there's value to that. I mean, where else on a college campus can you run a $100,000 budget before you get out in the real world? There's real value to doing that out in the real world. So learn it now. So, all right, very good. So the Greek system, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. It's under fire right now. I think we see that over and over again. Certainly, even at my own alma mater at the University of Buffalo, I dealt with a really difficult situation over the last week. So what should fraternities and sororities be doing differently to ensure that fraternity stays relevant and continues to grow for the next 100 years?
I had the opportunity to speak to a group of fraternity and sorority leaders at Quinnipiac for their Impact conference that they had a couple weeks ago. And I had a chance in one of our small breakout groups to really just work with the men that were representing IFC. And I went off script for one of the questions that I asked. And I asked very pointedly, other than the points that you are giving people for doing any of the things that you're requiring them to do, what leadership are you doing on campus? Silence. And it made me realize that there are hidden opportunities for both our men's and our women's groups to either partner or work separately to really advance issues around misogyny, sexism, equity, gender expression, sexual orientation, like all those isms and others, and feeling othered, usually lack access to power and privilege, usually lack access to coordinated efforts, or people that believe that their issues are impacting more than just the people that are othered. And they're usually a smaller group on a college campus. What if our men's groups were to talk about issues of gender equity? We value same-sex, the value of same-sex leadership opportunities. Why are we not championing issues around equity? When we think about issues around sexual misconduct, why aren't the men that we say are leaders in their chapters not becoming leaders in changing the culture in their campus? Why aren't they leading those efforts? And not just half-handedly, not mandatory programming that people are coming to, but really investing in training and facilitation and becoming people that the group that people turn to and go, you know who's a really great group to work with? These IFC men over here. They've invested hours of training and investment in their community, and they're not just here on the college campus, but they're out in the local community, really engaging in these conversations. I think we're sometimes I think we don't ask enough of our men sometimes to not just be leaders among themselves, but really be leaders on the campus and in the community, because there's risk. It's all reputational risk. It is all something that puts them out there that if they fail or if they do it poorly, people are going to think badly of them. But I don't know if there's anything left to risk. I like, what else could we not be doing to demonstrate that we don't care? And I think these organizations, whether at the IFC level or among chapters or among the Greek communities among themselves, really need to figure out, like, what is it that we can demonstrate to the people who matter, which is everybody on campus? How can we tell them that these are our values of inclusion, brotherhood, sisterhood, leadership, these are not we don't own these words. And yet we treat them as if we're the only people who know how to do them. But if we really want people to know something about our values, we need to be doing it for everybody, literally everybody. And we need to be hitting those controversial topics, because if Harvard's ability to target students that are affiliated with fraternities and sororities has any sticking or traction, everybody's next. Everybody's next. We need to be the provocative leaders that the founders were when they started the organizations 100 years ago.
100%.
Like, you need to be provocative.
Right.
And if you're not, you're just kind of going, you know what, we're part of the establishment. No, oh my God, like, do you understand in 2019, the last thing you want to be is establishment. Like, that literally puts a target on you for people that know how to dismantle this type of organization. All you have to do is demonstrate that you're not doing the things that aren't just politically correct, but ethically correct.
And you're talking much more than just words, much more than just saying the creed. You're talking about actual action. That's what you're talking about. And I hope that we can get there. And I'm constantly pushing the undergrads to take that action as quickly as possible. You were at Mount Ida College most recently. You were their Director of Student Affairs, Assessment, and Engagement Operations. The college closed, and I remember reading a very vulnerable blog that you wrote, and you were talking about managing professional conferences while you're unemployed. And you constantly had to answer that question, where do you work? So as more colleges close, I think this is gonna become more of a common situation at conferences where you have people attending that are not currently employed. So what is the best way for people to handle this? Because I know there's others that are in the same situation.
I always want to remind people that the closing of a college is akin to any sort of personal tragedy or natural disaster that a person can go through. It's very similar to the death of a student. You know, nothing prepares you for it. Nothing prepares you for the grief that you feel that comes in waves. How do you talk about it respectfully when you do want to talk about it, but the times you don't want to talk about it? How do you avoid it? I mean, it's a very strange experience to go through, both someone who experienced it a year ago and is still trying to figure out how to talk about it a year later. Like, it just, there's no easy answer is the best way I could describe that. But the one thing that I learned, so I did go to a national conference here in Boston. I went to the ACPA annual convention here in Boston, and I started asking people, what type of work do you do? Rather than centering who they were professionally at an institution, I centered my questions around their passion in the work. And it made me realize that for those of us that are marginally connected to higher ed, but aren't affiliated with an institution, I don't want to be diminished anymore. The work that I'm doing, contributing to my field, is just as valid as the practitioners that are working 40 hours a week at an institution. And so when I started asking those questions about what type of work do you do, the questions were much more interesting. The answers were much more interesting because now I could actually talk about your passion, your work. What do you need? What are you trying to do? What are you trying to accomplish? But the minute I start with, where do you work? Well, now I have to talk about your department, your policies, your procedures. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, you know, there are many things I miss about working 40 hours a week. The last thing I miss is talking about policy. Right. So let's talk about that. But I do think if we were to engage people from a place of passion and values, we would find ourselves better connected and able to direct people to who share our passion and values.
Yeah, you're so right about that. And I'm guilty of that too. I mean, I start all these conversations, whether it be in the higher ed world or the corporate world, with what organization do you work for, right? What college are you at? What company you at? And I'm guilty of it. And if I just reframe the question in terms of what are you passionate about, those conversations will go so much better.
Well, and I think part of it though is that for for someone like you, where you're trying to develop a network and you are trying to mentally remember where are people working across the country so that you can reach out to people through a network.
Yes.
But when you're at a national conference, you're all there for the same reason. Like, I don't need to network with you. You're a member of my association. I know where to find you. You know, like, I don't need to figure out and remember this anymore. I just have to write down your name and I just go to a directory. Why do you have to tell me where you work? You're wearing a name tag. That was the other thing. Is like, why do we continue to ask people that they're wearing a name tag and telling people? Like, let's ask better questions. And it avoids the PTSD of being continually traumatized by having to retell the story of why did this institution close. So I'm actually writing a book about this. And one of the chapters is how to avoid the awkward questions at professional conferences, because there are other awkward questions that I get asked. One was, oh, that must have been really tough on the students. How do you think that they managed it? I'm the person unemployed. They're all at the school or they graduated. I don't know what you're talking to them about. The students are going to be okay. Yeah. I'm the one who needs a job. Like, let's not talk about them right now. Let's talk about me. And so that's please don't talk about students with somebody who lost their job. It really, because it removes them from the narrative of their own story. And I now have to talk about myself in third person.
Right. So important. I find your blog to be so authentic as I read it. Another great blog post that you wrote talked about navigating institutional politics. And you talk about the pressure that people from oppressed communities face in professional work environments. So how does somebody recognize these unwritten rules that you're talking about that an employee would be measured against?
I think whenever anything is crouched in the language of being professional hair, professional dress. One really great thing was in the Student Affairs Facebook group was, do you get points for people that send thank you cards at the end of an interview? And you realize that all of these are messages around social capital that are transmitted through people, through communities that they're a part of, and truthfully from a very middle class background, that these are middle class experiences of job searching. My parents that worked in service industry jobs for 40 years never sent a thank you card at the end of an interview. Their interviews lasted an hour. And they were probably told at the end of the hour whether they got the job. You didn't send a thank you card. And so when we think about these hidden ideas around professional work, what's the motivation behind it? It's the first thing that I always ask myself is, are they using this as a way to exclude people? So in this Facebook group was, the woman said, if somebody doesn't send a thank you card, I don't consider them to go into the next round. Well, was that in the job description? Is that in your matrix or your rubric? What would your HR manager say if they knew that this is how you treated potential employees? You know, and it's those asking those critical questions and really kind of pushing back when you hear these things is really important. So I used to work with a lot of college students and in one of the managing a lot of like front desks work. And I would talk to my manager, you know, can we purchase polo shirts for them? Because we can't assume that our students can wear professional clothes to school every day. I know that when I was in college, I lived hand to mouth. And I didn't have separate clothes for work that I had for classes. And so, again, I think we just really need to reinforce, like, where are these questions and behaviors coming from? And where are they centered? And if they're centered in anywhere that assumes some sort of social capital, and we're going to exclude people who aren't demonstrating it, you need to look at those questions again, or those behaviors again, and really recenter them on what are you actually measuring people on?
Yeah. Okay, that's really good. I know you've used the disk inventory for employees when communication was an issue in the work environment. And I also think about fraternity and sorority and their chapters, perhaps they could also gain useful insight by using the disk inventory. So, what can students uncover about themselves and also others in their chapter with this particular tool?
Um, when I was at NJIT, all the chapters were required to do a disc leadership inventory with my office. And it was probably one of the best received workshops that was mandatory. Because to me, like, you can't make leadership mandatory, but I can give you insights on how to run your chapter better. And so the first thing we would do was we would identify who was one of what was your preferred characteristic? Were you a D, I, S, or C? And then I would go around the room and go, this is the person that's plays devil's advocate. This is the person in the room who goes, but what are we going to do with everybody else? And this is the person who's just yelling out ideas. And this is the person that's like, but we don't have the money for it. And not knowing anybody in the chapter, they would go like, how can you do that? Because if your behaviors are aligned with these categories, you can begin to predict conflicts. And the idea of using and understanding the disc is to understand how to work through conflict. If I can anticipate the question that you're already asking, and I don't even know you, I can give you this information first. And now we're not in conflict. Actually, you're getting exactly what you want, and I'm getting exactly what I want. And we didn't have to do anything other than communicate differently what people need. We also talked about how do you align some of the behaviors with some of your chapter operations. You know, you can't have a person who's a D, who's a dominant person as the president year after year after year after year, because there's no breathing room. You know, you do need to bring in other people, but you should always have a person who's a C in charge of the finances, because they're going to realize the bottom line. Never have a person who's an I in charge of the finances, because they're too easily influenced. No. You want to have somebody who's going, we don't have the money for that. Right. And when you begin to understand that, or people who are S's who are in charge of your ritual and things that have to do with brotherhood or sisterhood, if you understand what they contribute to the group, your organization begins to have less conflict and more behaviors that are related to functional organizations, and you have less conflict because you're not arguing over the stupid things anymore.
Yeah, it's so smart. You're absolutely right. I'm very familiar with the DISC assessment. I think you're right. You could almost create a schedule that says, if you're looking for this position, this is the type of person you need based on this assessment. And you could almost
talk about like, and how does that influence how you're recruiting members? Because I's are always going to recruit other I's. They're always going to go for the most outgoing, chatty people. And you're like, and this is why you have chapter with 75 people that are talking over each other and nobody's listening. It's because you only let the chatty people recruit. No. You got to let other people recruit. Let other people bring in people that are similar to them, or they don't replace themselves.
Right. So smart. Really, really good stuff. Now, you started Leadership and Values in Action as a consulting business, and you have various services that you offer. You offer career coaching, goal setting, workshops for both students and also for professionals. What are some of your favorite workshops that you like to do?
One of my favorite workshops that I like doing with students is how to highlight your leadership on your resume. I find that with most of the fraternity and sorority leaders that I've had a chance to work with, they reduce their affiliation to a sentence, if that, on their resume. Member, this is the years, or president, this term. Mm-hmm. What did you do?
Right.
You ran a business. Oh my gosh, you understand? Like, you need to be talking about that like it's work, because you showed up to work every day to do that position. And I think people begin to let go of what they fear about their reputation by talking about these things. But if you're able to walk people through how much they invested in their own professional development in their organizations, they move it up a little bit higher on their resume. And that's what I want to see. I want to see them like, you need to treat this like it was a volunteer position, because none of you got paid to be president. So you can actually talk about this like it's service.
Right.
It's service. So talk about it.
Very good. Yeah.
And I think
Quantify for me what you did. Don't just tell me you were president. Don't tell me that you were treasurer. Quantify. Give me data and numbers.
Give me information. And I think with professional staff, something that I really like to do with them is helping them understand how to assess differently. I think professionals in higher ed, we over assess and then do nothing with the information. I think if we assessed less but told a better story with what we learned, we would actually shape the experiences on the college campus. I think we would actually get more money. I think we're very much concerned with satisfaction. I don't need to satisfy a student. I need to teach them. I need them to learn. And the things that impact satisfaction are generally around where money is spent outside of my pay grade. And I need to give them the data to understand how to move dollars into places where I can better teach them and create these experiences for them. But I think we're invested in assessment poorly when we do it, and we aren't telling the right story when we do.
So smart. I love it. So you know that we love to eat great food here at Fraternity Foodie. So if we find ourselves in the Boston area, where should we go to grab a bite to eat, in your opinion?
So most people that are coming through Boston are going to somehow end up in the Peru or the Prudential Center, which is right next to the Convention Center in the Back Bay. My favorite place is in Italy, which is kind of like the marketplace that is popping up in a lot of large cities, but their signature restaurant is sometimes different in every Italy. In Boston, it's called Terra, Terra. And it's a fusion Italian, Brazilian steakhouse, but also does great seafood because it's Boston. But they also do like a really wonderful charcuterie and cheese board. Like it is like one of my favorite restaurants to take people who eat different types of foods, but are, you know, maybe vegetarian or gluten-free, or are like me, like I just want a good steak. Yeah, like that's gluten-free, right? Like, so I can eat steak.
Sure.
But it caters to so many different types of palates. It's the place that I take friends that are coming to visit because they're gonna be able to walk through the Peru, which I think is a Boston experience. But they're gonna get some good food with a gorgeous restaurant, and you get to see the open grill area in the kitchen areas. So it's one of my favorite places to go.
Sounds perfect. So when I'm speaking in Boston, you know I'm going to give you a call. We're going to get some steaks.
We're going to get some steak. Oh, yeah, definitely.
That sounds great. So if a student or a professional staff member, let's say they want to connect with you after this interview, they want to get some more information about what you're doing, where should they go to connect with you? Or is there a website, social media, email? Where should they go?
So they can find me on my website, leadershipandvaluesinaction.com, all one word. They can send me an email at josephndrios@leadershipandvaluesinaction.com. I'm on Instagram as Joseph and Rios EDD. And I'm on Twitter as Joe Trojan 97. So I couldn't forget my USC affiliation. Everything's a Joe Trojan somewhere.
I love it. I love it. Very good. Well, listen, this has been great. I think this has been really helpful for both students and also for professionals. You know, I think the world of you. I've appreciated all of our connections over the years. And what can I say? You're an amazing person. So I appreciate our friendship, and we'll be talking, I'm sure. I'm sure our paths are going to be crossing very, very soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the time today. I appreciate it.
Of course. It's my pleasure. Thank you to the audience for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Fraternity Foodie. Bye for now.